Hi there, my name's Kaytee. I am the founder of the Boyd Clinic and have been working with MS patients for quite some time, probably about 15 years. I specialise in hard to treat cases of autoimmune, but also I do a lot of work with cancer. I have a lot of Olympic athletes on my book, but I actually really enjoy getting into the nitty-gritty of cellular function and physiology of the human body. I am so excited to share this information with you. So please be prepared for me going on big tangents. I'll try and stay focused. It's a lot easier seeing people face to face. And this whole COVID thing has made it a lot more difficult, but also a lot more accessible to get information because you can be in your PJs with your Ugg boots on, having a cup of tea in the morning, or it could be that it's a rainy day and it's a good time to sit down with a pad and pen and to absorb some information. What I would say before we get started is grab a pen and paper and put 1, 2, 3 along the left-hand column. So if you're quite new, and obviously this is the whole functionality of this talk was for newly diagnosed MS. So if you're newly diagnosed and this all seems completely overwhelming, which is totally normal, then the top 3 things will be what resonates with you the most, that you feel comfortable, that could be applied now without you feeling that you should be doing more, or that guilt trip that we have when we might be eating something that, oh, you know, people tell me I shouldn't be doing this, but we've got Christmas, we've got New Year's. If you watch this after those times, those festive seasons are over, it could just be day to day. You know, we tend to feel guilty and beat ourselves up about foods. So that's not what this is about. This is about empowering you and giving yourself an opportunity to be educated. But if you do have something really yummy like Christmas cake and all that delicious stuff, not to feel guilty about it. So without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen with you. So you should be able to see this and not me. So what I wanted to say before we start off is the information in this whole presentation is simply for educational purposes, not medical advice. And if you need to seek advice on for a medical professional for any of the information that I cover in this, please do so and make sure you do some independent research. Don't expect your doctor to know much about nutrition. They don't teach it at med school. So that's something that we learn quite quickly as we're having conversations with medical professionals. Don't expect them to know everything. They have so much to do anyway. So what we're going to cover is the basics on nutrition. Hopefully we'll get time to cover a little bit on supplementation and also what you can do nutritionally to support yourself. If you've done any of the research on MS, you'll find that there's so much conflicting information. I do a lot of work with cancer and see cancer patients. And just to give you an example, there's different diets for different cancer, just like there's different diets for different autoimmune diseases. And one of the things that I find really fascinating is some people specific diets work really, really good. And for others, they don't get any benefit. So let's take Dr. Terry Weil's protocol, for example, which I kind of started getting into in the early 2000s with some of my clients. And for some, it's completely overwhelming. You eat kilos and kilos of vegetables and juices a day. So it can be a little bit overwhelming. Let me just show you. This is... So here is our autoimmune kind of cascade. So this can be some of the reasons that we end up with an autoimmune disease. Sometimes it can be toxicity, sometimes it's genetics. And interestingly enough, we'll talk a little bit about that later. About a third, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more of the risk factors for autoimmune disease are genetic. But your genes load the gun but the environment can pull the trigger. So if you're someone who has had a copious amounts of stress throughout your life, and over some time, that stress then induces your autoimmune disease, like MS, that can be one of the triggers. Allergies is a big one. So we have a bit of a checklist that sometimes when I'm working with people we'll go through. Not so much with MS, it's a little bit more complex, but just to give you an idea that you have all of these different elements that can be contributing to autoimmune disease. So my secret theory behind Terry Wells is maybe there was some nutrient deficiency, maybe there was some toxicity. The more nutrients you put in, the more or the better off your cells are at having good immune system, being able to be resilient, and helping to fight infection, modulating and getting better sleep, all the things that we require for good immune function. So I don't, now after everything that I've read, I don't think that there's one really good diet for autoimmune, unfortunately. I think it really starts off on eating healthier. I do tend to kind of focus more on the Terry Wells protocol with low grain or no grain, and no dairy. I think those are the two things that in the literature show up to be really, really complementary for anyone with an autoimmune disease. So no dairy and no gluten. And what I will do is I'll send this through so that you will have a copy of it, or it's available from the MS Society. It will be different from what you may have heard before. They call it the AIP protocol, or Autoimmune Paleo Protocol. And this is a cookbook. So it gives you tons of recipes. It's based on healing the gut lining, which we'll talk about, and adding tons and tons of nutrients back into the body, as well as helping your gut bacteria, those little bugs that live in your large intestine or your colon, to help with immune function. So let's put that away for the time being and move on from this. Yes, so the basic synopsis of this, of different diets, is the more you can eat nutritional, high dense, really good quality food, the better off we are anyway. And that's for all walks of life, for whatever dis-ease there is. And interestingly enough, I have quite a few MS clients that do a low-fat diet, and there's been some interesting research just coming out of Johns Hopkins University now about ketogenic diet being helpful for MS, which goes against everything that we've heard before about low fat and making sure saturated fat was extremely low. So we're still learning too. I'll give you a quick synopsis later about fasting and how that seems to be really helpful when it comes to autoimmune diseases. But let's go on to your genetics. So genes have a really important function, and you get half from dad and half from mum. A little bit more of your energy cell production from your mum, but basically 50-50. So one half from dad, one half from mum makes you you. Only you. One single blueprint in the whole wide world, which is you. Now, what we found is that there's some great literature looking at twins, for example, who would almost be an identical match. Now, say, for example, Jennifer eats really healthy, she stays lean, but Karen eats unhealthy and gets overweight. These two, let's say let me back that up. There's an obesity gene called FTO. Not too important, but this is just an example. Now, an obesity gene can be switched on and off like a light switch, just like hundreds of your other genes. Now, if that obesity gene is silenced, it can be silenced by eating healthy, good quality food. So Jennifer, who has the fat gene, there's a few of them, so this is a bit old, but anyway, will stay lean. But if Karen eats unhealthy food, it can change the way that her genes are expressed. So when we said before about genes load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger, this is a great example. So genetics has a huge impact on your autoimmune protocol and how that may carry on, but it's not the only factor, and you can do a huge amount to offset what your genetics is. So here's a couple of examples. Now, you guys will get these notes. Your genetic accounts for approximately 1/3 of your risk for autoimmune disease. There's actually more than 68 different gene variants that can identify your risk for autoimmune. However, there's 1 + 1 + 1. So if you're someone that has quite a few of those genes, it can mean that your prerequisition or your likelihood of possibly having a higher chance or prevalence for an autoimmune disease goes up. And what do? Well, what we want to do first and foremost is think about our environment. What are we putting in our bodies? There's fats, carbohydrates, and proteins that you get from food. But what I want you to have a look at is, see these gray boxes? Those are the nutrients that you need. So vitamin Bs, magnesium, we've got lipoate or lipoic acid from good quality fats. We've got B vitamins again, carnitine from animal protein. So what happens is when you consume food, protein, fats, and carbohydrates, they get broken down. And then these little things here, these nutrients, are what they call your rate limiting steps. If you had a car with a car key, you can't get in your car, or unless you have, let's say it's like a 1980 Cortina, just bear with me, I'm from Waiuku. So you have a 1980 Cortina, you need to put the car key in to unlock the car and then to turn the car on. Otherwise, you're not going anywhere. These are the car keys, the rate limiting step for this to go into this whole metabolic cycle. So one round of this creates energy, or your ATP. When that's not functioning well, your energy is lower, your fatigue is higher. So this is a really, really key thing to understand, is that it's about the types of foods that you put in that helps to regulate this energy cycle. What we're going to discuss now is a little bit more about, like, okay, well, that's all well and good, but like, what does that actually look like? So let's go straight to, let's go to this, and why wheat is a problem. So we know that in the literature, wheat and dairy products can be problematic, and it does play a role in progression, which sounds bizarre. Now, we've got concrete trucks going past, so there might be a bit of noise in here. What we know is that it can increase something called intestinal permeability. Now, what that means, and you don't have to be a celiac, so gluten or gliadin is a protein that actually will start to spread or can separate the cells in the gut lining. So you end up with these big holes, which makes things not so good. So proteins can get through this gap, gluten, and cause inflammation. So they call it leaky gut, just it's an easy terminology. And I've got a couple of references below, but there's lots more coming out about this all the time. One of my besties is a psychologist and talks about leaky gut being a problem for mood, sleep disturbances, inability to think clearly, all sorts, depression. So she's really, really big on making sure that people go gluten-free, dairy-free when she's working with depression and anxiety. So I think there's quite a lot that you can be doing for this, and there's lots of gluten-free, dairy-free products out there now. When I was at university, I was dating a lecturer. He was really young though. Anyway, I bought him a bread maker for Christmas, and over the course of the next couple of months, he got really thin and very tired and listless. What we didn't know was he was actually an undiagnosed celiac. So way back then, you used to have to buy rice flour from overseas and tapioca starch, and we spent lots of money, and I'm a student, so it was pretty tough going, and we'd have to make these big blocks of gluten-free bread, and they were horrible. Now there's so much selection. So it is a good time in the world to try out gluten-free, dairy-free if you want to give it a go. You'll hear a lot in the future in your specialists and your doctor's surgeries about what they call the microbiome. The microbiome relates to a cluster or an area in your body that has bacteria, viruses, fungi, and they're meant to be there. So it's not a bad thing that you have an oral microbiome, you have a gut microbiome, we have a little bit of certain organisms living in the stomach, a little bit in the small intestine, but the majority of our gut microbiome lives in the colon. So if we were to scrape from one end to the other to weigh how much of that microbiome you have, it should be around about 1.5 kilos. So think about your 1 litre milk bottle in the fridge, pour your 1 litre almond milk or your carton of oat milk. That's pretty much 1 kilo. So 1 litre equates to 1 kilo basically. So that's quite a lot of bacteria if you think about it living in your gut. Now, why are they important? Well, they harvest your food. Not only that, they actually help to decrease inflammation. They produce lots of really important things. One of them is called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factors, which makes you feel good, makes you feel happy. They are responsible for interacting with your DNA. So the bacteria produce these juicy things. We'll call them short chain fatty acids. Anyway, they produce this stuff that actually talks to your genes and keeps you healthy. So we need these gut bugs to be really, really diverse. So lots of different types of gut bugs. And it's like a really big population of humans. We want as much diversity in there as we possibly can. That's what we're aiming for really good health. When it comes to autoimmune diseases, what they are discovering is that a lot of the time, particularly in the small intestine, so that's that tubing, because basically hole to hole, we've got about 10 meters of length of digestive tissue. Pretty cool. It's really, really delicate. So that tiny, tiny skin layer that protects the inside of you, your blood, anything that gets absorbed into your bloodstream, is if I pulled my hair, one of my hairs out and split it in half, that is 1 cell thickness. So that is all that protects you from whatever's going through your tubing, your digestive system. So if we were to take a tiny little cut and look at it through a different lens, it looks like this. And so you have these millions and millions of villi, they call them, so finger-like projections, and different parts of the villi absorb different nutrients. We need this to be as healthy as possible so that you can absorb as much nutrients as you possibly can. Now, if we took one of these tiny villi and we looked at it like this, see that's only 1 cell thick. So the food that you eat has to be chewed really well. You need to be in a calm, relaxed state when you eat. Otherwise, you don't produce digestive enzymes, and it means that you won't be able to get as much out of your diet as you possibly could, which is a waste of money. And it also means that you're dipping out on good stuff that could be helping your immune system. So once that food gets through between the cells, it goes on to make proteins, it'll go on to make hormones, it can help repair your eyes. So that's why it's important that this brush border of that gut stays as healthy as you can possibly get it. And why we say don't do gluten and dairy, because those proteins can actually stimulate the immune system to upregulate your autoimmune. So those soldiers that get confused about what's not you and what's you, that seems to heighten when we go gluten and dairy in the diet. And now we have quite a lot of interesting information that's coming out about this. So there's more and more publications on intestinal permeability. or leaky gut coming out. So it's definitely something which I think is going to be of greater importance all the time. And what we usually say is it takes about 10 years for research to get into mainstream medicine. So that's your specialists' clinics, that's your doctor's surgeries. So 10 years is like a normal plus or minus a few years for information to get to where it needs to get to and to you. So what diet do we follow? If you are someone that your autoimmune disease has been sparked off or initiated from leaky gut, which I've tested quite a few now. It's a basic mannitol lactulose test. You just consume a liquid. You wait for 6 hours and you collect your urine. If the carbohydrate solution gets through the gaps, it ends up in the bladder, and you can test how much of that whole glucose or carbohydrate molecule comes out. Anyway, right, so which diet do we follow? Well, for ultimate health, even if this is not just for autoimmune, this is what I work with my cancer patients with. We usually say a difference between a Mediterranean and gluten-free are the ones that get you a huge diversity of good bacteria, and you're keeping the surface of your gut, that 1/2 a hair thickness, nice and protected. That's the key. So you want Mediterranean, you think about Mediterranean, what does that sound like? That'd be lots of vegetables, fresh fish. Some say nuts and seeds, but we may kind of take those out a little bit if your autoimmune is not playing ball and you can't quite get on top of symptoms. So that is this. So, if we take that villi, so here is your villi, there's a tiny little part in here that produce stem cells. So they call this the crypt. And when you have leaky gut, what can happen is it doesn't really get a chance to repair if you were eating all the time, like breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner. So what the researchers have shown is that fasting, and this is for a 5-day fasting mimicking, so you're still eating food, but it's such a small amount that it mimics a fasted state, that after 5 days, your crypt starts pumping out stem cells, which helps you to repair and recover that leaky gut. So the research on that is actually becoming quite well known now, and I use it all the time for anyone who's healing or anyone who needs to, who's had an operation or needs some work on their gut lining. What fasting's also done is it's shown to help improve your immune system. The other amazing thing that some of you may be interested in is that research called Valter Longo. So he has a longevity, he publishes in longevity, but he also has been publishing in what it takes to regenerate organs. And his research is groundbreaking. Never done before. No one ever thought that you would be able to regenerate parts of the pancreas, which is what produces insulin. Diabetics who are type 1 who need to inject insulin, their pancreas doesn't work. There's specific parts of their pancreas that don't work. What he's been publishing, and this is quite some time ago, so this is 2016, we're almost in 2022 now. 2022. So what he was looking at was a fasting mimicking diet, which is 800 calories. It's extremely low protein and carbohydrates. And its job is to trick the body into thinking it's starving. So it basically goes into repair, recycle mode. So anything that's not kind of working gets a chance to be broken down and recycled and used in a way that's helpful. What he found in mice is there was a remyelination of the axons, which for MS, that's super exciting. So I'm looking forward to seeing his next publications. If you can have a look, here's the demyelination and here's the remyelination of the myelin sheath, which, wow, that just blew me away. So I've been following his work for quite some time. Yeah, that in itself just made me feel very excited about possibilities. But let's have a quick chat about what to eat, because it's super confusing. Like, what do we do? Do we eat vegetables? Do we eat sugar? I'd say to start with, we want to get as much natural products as possible. So just eat real food. What does that look like? Well, what grows under the ground? What grows on top of the ground? What flies? What swims? What runs is a great place to start. What can you pick off a tree? That would be a really good starting point for where we kind of move our food to. Interestingly enough, I used to be a professional athlete, and we were living in a place called Kutztown, which is Amish country. So they have markets every week. And I grew up on lunch and sausage and mashed potato and silver beet. So we lived a very simple, didn't have much money, and I didn't know anything about different types of vegetables or what they call heritage variety. Heritage and heirloom are your old-fashioned, very, very unique, original foods that haven't been bred to have a specific shape. So say, for example, the tomatoes that you see in the supermarket have been hybridized to look and taste a certain way. The look is more important because they use them for exports in places like Japan. But have a look at these. Aren't they amazing? Everything is perfect as nature intended. There's strips and straps and all sorts of different colors. What this is heirloom. So this was a guy I used to go and buy my onions off, and he's a seed banker, someone that keeps all the seeds and it's passed on from generation to generation. He's a sixth generation Amish growing vegetables, which is just fantastic. So why is this important for you? Most of us get our fruit and vegetables from the supermarket, which come from depleted soils, and they're only what they call monocropping, so the same thing over and over, which means that we get deficient in specific minerals. Your vegetables and the foods that you eat, especially if they're plant-based, have to come from nutrient-dense soil. So we really want to focus on going to farmers markets when we can. Sometimes it's a hell of a lot cheaper. So what you'll find is if anyone's ever been to Europe or to France and has had a croissant and had absolutely no problems with it, no bloating, no nothing, what they've done is they have bred in America and Australia the plant to have a higher yield. So more of the top part of the grain, which means that its protein structure is slightly changed. Also, when we get imported flours from overseas, they add gluten to make the bulk bigger and weigh more, so they get more money for it. We don't digest that kind of food as well as what we do the heirloom variety of wheat. So it's quite important. So here's your typical tomato that's grown to look a certain way for export. Now, when you pick something that's not ripe, you're not getting as much what they call salvestrols, which is an immune modulator. Salvestrols are so important because they really help us to keep well. And you don't get that when you're just getting, or you don't get as much of it when the food is sprayed, and you don't get as much of it when it's picked before it's ripe. Now that's really, really important because a lot of our food is stored in a cool store, which means that it's in a specific gas regulated temperature for, it could be months. So when we get that food, the salvestrols drop, which is super important because we really want to get stuff that's in season, that's grown locally. We know that they're sprayed less and it's going to be much more nutrient dense for our bodies. So they may look a bit strange, but they definitely will be better for us. And in New Zealand, we don't have as much nutrients in our soils as other countries. Some of them, for example, are zinc. So one way to tell is if you don't have nail polish on, have a look for white spots. What you usually find also is if you're naturally more of a sensory person, so you're on the go all the time, you're thinking ahead, people would call you anxious, but I'd call you hypervigilant or hyper aware. You can walk into a room and you'd be assessing how everybody is. You're a list taker, you're detailed orientated. Usually that type of person will have more white spots because stress requires more zinc. You need more zinc when you're stressed. Selenium is another really important one, and that's also important for autoimmune disease. So selenium you get from Brazil nuts, and we have really low levels in our soil. So that's something I would say, it doesn't have it on the autoimmune paleo diet, but I would definitely be supplementing with a broad spectrum mineral for anyone with an autoimmune condition. Iodine is another one we don't really get much of, and that's why they put it in salt. Boron, we don't have that much detail on boron, but when I have tested people, they're low. So what we want to be doing is eating foods that are high in these. But I do now actually recommend that people get a good quality multi-mineral to help supplement them in their diet. The other thing that we want to add is something called omega-3 fish oil, which I'm sure most people know about. There is some studies that show that using a good quality fish oil is very, very helpful. It's also been one of the things we use for COVID, and you can get it in a vegetarian form if you're someone who doesn't want to eat animals. You can get it in an algal form or algae. So those ones you can buy from www.healthpost.co.nz or www.i and then herb.com. Other ways to get it would be flaxseed oil, or if you do have flax seeds, you want to put them buy yourself a real cheap coffee grinder from Briscoe's and blend them up. So you whiz them and chop them all up, chuck them in a jar and use them throughout the week. So a couple of tablespoons a day is spot on. And one of my big things, which will go against quite a few who are old school Teruel fans, is using organ meats. I'm a huge fan of organ meats. I've been doing a lot of research on genetics, and you get brilliant results when you are using such a high potent B12, zinc, B6. It's just full of nutrients, folate. There's no other food product I have ever found that has as much nutrients as liver. And for some people, it's just a no-go, and that's totally okay. For others who want to give it a go, you can freeze it and grate it frozen into things like minced bolognese, or grate it into like a stir fry or anything like that. It's much easier to work with, and it can kind of be a little bit less problematic. Others whiz it in a blender and add it to their mince and make mince balls. So I'm a huge fan of using it. The other thing you can do is you can make pate, which, oh my God, so delicious. That's a really great way of getting a massive boost of zinc and B12. I hope you guys are doing all right. Oh my God. So vitamin D, super, super, super interesting. And it's not a vitamin, it's actually like a pro-hormone, which means that it works as an immune modulator for anything to do with the immune system. Vitamin D is one of my top 3. You can get a blood test done from your GP, and if they won't do it, well, you have to pay for it. So it's not funded. but it's really, really key because most of the time, my autoimmune clients and my cancer patients, when they're coming out of winter, there's not one so far that I've tested who hasn't been deficient unless they're taking vitamin D as a supplement. What we look for is, I'd usually say, between 600 IUs to 2000 a day from the end of summer heading into autumn if you're not getting much sunshine, but please test first. You can get vitamin D in food, like egg yolks is probably the best absorbable form. So is beef. Beef liver actually is, again, there's liver, and things like your cod liver oil, but it's quite small. I would definitely suggest getting tested. So I like to have levels between 100 to 120, but what some different people have different preferred levels, but definitely critical for MS. Anything autoimmune related and cancer and any other, like vitamin D is just so helpful for everything. Here's where you can get it in food. Now, another interesting tidbit, if you get mushrooms and you turn them upside down on the windowsill and expose them to sunlight for half an hour to an hour, the UV helps to create vitamin D2, which then your body will absorb and turn into vitamin D3. So there you go. So things that you can do to help vitamin D work better is magnesium. And magnesium's a big one. That's another one that we don't get that much in our diet. And I do think if you're not able to get enough of the right nutrients, so say you've got a busy lifestyle and don't have much time for food prep, it could be something important. I like to have my clients take an extra 400 milligrams of magnesium, magnesium citrate, magnesium bisglycinate. Magnesium L-threonate is the only one that gets in through the blood-brain barrier and can help you sleep at night if you've got a monkey mind or the orchestras going on. Plus with MS, there is a lot of my clients that were struggling with insomnia and sleep issues. So if that's you, magnesium L-threonate is definitely your preferred form. It'll be really calming. If you overdo it, the worst thing that happens is you'll get the runs. And this is actually my gene report. So I thought I'd show you this because it can be a bit complex. Like when we talk about vitamin D3, that's the stuff that's bioavailable that your cells will use. That's the supplement that you get given by your GP. So if they give you it's usually 50,000 IUs. It's a one-off dose that you take every month that helps to keep your vitamin D3 elevated in your blood. So these are all the steps that you need, and you have a look at that yellow, orange, and red. So the orange and red they're all genes. It's all gene related. So if you're orange or red for all of those, you really do want to get a supplement to help you. And taking something called sulforaphane, which is a broccoli sprout extract, helps to get vitamin D into the cell. So if you have a look at that bottom where it says VDR1, VDR2, VDR3, I got this done because my family has a high risk our family has melanoma, leukemia, stroke, cardiovascular disease, and I wanted to know what my risk was for melanoma, or, if there's any correlation. And there is, because basically vitamin D receptor is, here's the cell, here's the vitamin D receptor, here's vitamin D. It has to get in through the vitamin D receptor for it to work. So other people have good functioning and lots of them on the cell surface. I've only got a few. So it means that I need to keep my vitamin D levels really high in order for there to be enough vitamin D to get into the cell. And the other thing that I make sure I do is take plenty of broccoli sprouts. You can sprout them on the windowsill, but I also take a broccoli sprout extract in a capsule form. I don't think you want to hear this if you're a caffeine drinker like me, but there is some correlation between overdoing caffeine, which would be about between 2 to 3 a day, if you have a gene mutation called CYP1A2. So they think that it could be a negative if you have an autoimmune disease, because you're not going to be getting as much vitamin D into the cell. So if you do drink coffee, make sure you get your vitamin D levels checked, and take things like broccoli sprout powder in a smoothie or broccoli sprout in a capsule, and eat lots of cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, bok choy, things like that. Right. This is a typical plate, what we would say for anyone for health or for eating cleaner, getting more nutrients in. But if we're looking at inflammation, if you get joint pain, we would take out the tomatoes, the capsicums, and the potatoes. Those are your deadly nightshade family. And we'd switch them over for things like kumara, more mushrooms, and we'll put some chicken in there, some fish. And here's just a couple of suggestions for meals, so you guys will get a copy of all of these. And the one important thing I think that gets underrated is the requirement or the need for protein. Everybody needs protein. Protein has your building blocks, but they'll also keep you satisfied. So we're talking about fresh fish, chicken, liver, beef, lamb. I'm not a great fan of pork. I think it can be inflammatory. So too would be if you're frying it and you're creating charcoal red meat. I don't think that's actually that healthy for us. So if you do barbecue, you want to kind of keep it, just don't over charcoal the meat too much. So these are lunch boxes, just to give you an example of what we're after heaps more nutrients in the food, lots of color. We've got soaked oats for breakfast. If you're going to be moving towards your AIP or your autoimmune protocol, you'll be doing things like millet and buckwheat, which aren't gluten. So we're moving to gluten-free toast when you're doing your eggs. Also one thing is with autoimmune, the egg yolk is more your friend than the egg white. So depending on where you are in your health journey, if you're just starting out and eating clean is your priority, so getting rid of more junk food and takeaways, then any of this is going to be awesome, and be really proud of what you're able to achieve. If you've gone through those steps and you're on to the next phases of where it is that you'd like to work towards, then the AIP protocol could be useful. They don't do grain and they don't do egg. When you have had a period on that AIP protocol, we'd usually say between 3 to 6 months. I do bring an egg yolk again and we try it and test it and see if it has an effect on the immune system. If it doesn't, you're all good, and we would keep that in there. So you see a common trait here, right? Plenty of protein, lots of good quality vegetables. So you'll get copies of these, and they're not perfect, but neither is a diet. So we don't want this to be something that is not achievable and you wake up and feel overwhelmed. We want you to feel empowered and nourished when you have food that makes you feel good, but also is tasty too, because like, why would you do it otherwise? I definitely wouldn't. So these are recipes you guys will get. Quality. Now, cruciferous vegetables we briefly talked about with sulforaphane, which is the chemical that you get out of a broccoli sprout. You plant a broccoli in the ground, and as it starts to come up and you get those 2 little leaves out the side, or however many that come out, that has the same concentration of sulforaphane as a full-blown broccoli. So hence the reason why you want to get a lot of broccoli sprouts or microgreens versus, you'd have to eat like 10 buckets of broccoli to get the same amount as you would with a handful. Just as an example. So I think this is great. We do want to be looking at getting in more of these nutrient-dense foods, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, super healthy. Don't worry if you don't like sardines or seafood. There's lots of other things you can do. So now this is quite helpful. What we'd say is that you want to have on your plate about 50% raw, 50% cooked vegetables. If you're someone that's more naturally anxious or hardwired for fight flight, or you want to make sure that you know what's going on in your future, usually your digestive system won't quite be as efficient at digesting food because you're hardwired for fight flight. Someone else that might have a little bit more body fat or a little bit more muscle mass, they would come across as being a bit more relaxed, more emotionally resilient, take a lot longer for them to get stressed and burnt out. Their digestive system is usually a bit more robust. So someone who's more fight flight, I'd say don't eat as much raw food. You need things that are easy to digest, warming. In Ayurveda, we'd call that things like you do cinnamon, cumin, paprika, chili, foods that warm you up and help stimulate digestion. If you're someone that is already hot and needs cooling down, then you'd be adding in more raw foods. So a really good way to know is check out your number twos. Do you have good quality stonky number twos? If you do, you're probably doing pretty well. If you don't and you're getting more IBS symptoms, go easy on your tummy. Do things that are going to be really simple and don't cause you any problems. You'll get a copy of this. This is like getting more plant-based foods into your diet, like Terry Weil talks about. So as much color as you possibly can. I found this really fascinating. Meditation turns on genes that improves our body's resilience and reduces our vulnerability to disease. There was it wasn't the New Frontiers of Medicine research, it was another paper I read that showed that when you're meditating, prayer would be similar, or in a state where your brain is in a different brainwave pattern, you can switch on, I think it's like 2,000 of your anti-inflammatory health genes. So with my cancer patients, I always encourage them to do some form of mindful meditation or getting back in their body, which could simply be sitting on your chair or standing up and focusing on the air going in your nose and as it travels down, you're noticing how far down that air goes. And then as you breathe out, you're feeling the air come out your nose. That's it. That's meditation. It's part of being more consciously aware and getting out of that left brain and into your body. So we know that anything to do with mindfulness or being more conscious, and that could be conscious eating, being more present when you're around your food, taking things a bit slower, not rushing from place to place, is a great way to start. We talked a little bit before about insomnia and how with MS, there sometimes is quite a correlation with lack of sleep. So we really take this super seriously because it's sleep time where you recover. And we want to make sure that that's kind of a primary driver. So if anyone has not had good sleep, we would suggest looking at your B12 levels. So I'd get a blood test done from your GP and look at iron. So iron, ferritin, B12 are key things to look into. I prefer B12 being over 400 as a starting point on a blood test. All right, so this is so interesting. More sleep, better immune function, better physical repair, greater psychological repair, happier outcome. So that's what we're after. Okay, so how this works is if we're looking at this, in the morning when you first wake up, your body produces tons of cortisol. It's a stress hormone, but it's really good for us. Like, we need cortisol, we need stress. It's not a bad thing. But if it, and only if, we have that production long term over the course of the day, day after day after day, that's when it starts to become problematic. We talk about autoimmune and excessive stress being a trigger. So this is something that I think most of us living in this day and age really, and especially now at the moment, is something to work towards. So whether it's 5 minutes in the morning where you lie on the floor, you put a podcast on, or a 5-minute meditation, or there's the Calm app, there's Buddhify, there's quite a few apps now that can take you through a really simple, doesn't have to be flash, you don't have to like balance on your head, knitting your own yogurt, umming for an hour. It can be 5 minutes simple. It does not have to be long, but it does make a huge difference. We are pretty much out of time. I don't know whether, I think that's probably a really good starting point. And if anyone has any questions or anything like that, then feel free to contact the team and I will do my best to answer any questions you have. I hope you found it helpful, and I will also send out this, the Autoimmune Paleo cookbook, because there might be something in there that if anyone would like to look at it now, that it really just can be another tool in your toolbox, but it's not the only one. And I do seriously think that all autoimmunes, no matter what, so I have lots of Hashimoto's clients, which is an autoimmune of the thyroid. I give them different diets. They have different nutrients that they need because they're an individual. One person might be a CEO of a bank, another one might be a cleaner at a local school. I'm not giving them the same nutrients. The cleaner has 3 children. The CEO has no children, but a stressful job. Everybody's different environments. The cleaner works with chemical residues, so we need to keep working on detoxification. So there's just so much great stuff. But yeah, everybody's different. So just take that, keep that in mind when it comes to your diet. And it has to work for you. So hopefully that's helpful, and I hope you all have a lovely Christmas and New Year's, and look forward to seeing you all next year. Bye.